Have you ever had a moment that completely changed everything? A moment when someone you trusted, someone who said it was just friendship, crossed a line you never expected? This isn't a fantasy, and it happened to me. And no matter how many times I tell myself it didn't mean anything, I can't forget the look in his eyes after. If you've ever questioned what's real in a friendship that's too close, then you need to hear this. Stick around, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. When I first met Joran, everything seemed simple. Just two guys trying to make it work in a new city. I had recently moved in, eager to dive into my career, chasing goals, and leaving behind the familiar comforts of home. The plan was simple: get a roommate, split the rent, and stay focused on what really mattered. There was no time for distractions, no room for relationships, just my work, my ambition, and the drive to make something of myself. I didn't think much of the roommate interview. Joran and I weren't childhood friends or college roommates, just two strangers who happened to click. I remember the first time we met, the easy laughter over coffee, the sarcastic comments that made us both laugh harder than we expected. He had that kind of quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. It was like he could fill a room without saying a word, and yet, somehow, you felt like he had everything figured out. And I was just the guy who wanted a safe place to sleep and maybe a friend or two along the way. But like any story where things get complicated, it didn't take long for the lines between roommates to blur. I mean, who knew how a simple living situation could turn into something I wasn't prepared for? At first, it was nothing more than casual chats over coffee or the occasional shared dinner, nothing that stood out. But slowly, it was like the apartment, our space, became something else entirely. Joran would linger in doorways when we talked, standing just a little too close. He brushed past me in the kitchen, even though there was plenty of space, and each time it felt intentional. I'd shrug it off, convincing myself it didn't mean anything. He was just being himself, just being friendly. But there was this quiet pull I couldn't shake. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Just the way he would fall asleep on the couch, legs casually pressed against mine like it was no big deal. He'd smile and joke, and I'd laugh, but underneath all of that, there was this underlying question I couldn't ignore. Was this just friendship? Or was there something more? I tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, he said he was straight. And he had that classic ladies' man vibe, the kind that made him impossible to resist. I wasn't looking for anything more. I had a career to focus on. The last thing I needed was to make things messy with a roommate, especially someone I had just met. But it wasn't just the lingering touches. It was the way he would look at me sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, with an intensity that made my stomach flip. I kept telling myself that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure. The turning point came one rainy evening when the heater in our apartment broke. It was cold, colder than usual, and the blankets on the couch weren't enough to keep the chill away. Joran stood in my doorway that night, his arms crossed, hair a mess from the rain, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and hope. He wasn't asking to sleep in my bed. He was just asking if it was okay to crash in there for one night. I hesitated. Too long, apparently, because he didn't wait for an answer. "It's not like I'm going to cuddle you, Kale," he said, his voice carrying that playful edge. I shifted over to make room for him, telling myself it was only for one night. But when he slid into the bed beside me, I realized just how small the space was. The mattress dipped under his weight, and the air between us felt thick, like everything had just shifted in that moment. We lay there in the silence, the rain tapping against the window, and for the first time since he moved in, I felt his presence in a way I hadn't before. There was something different in the air, something that made my pulse quicken. "Are you cold?" he asked, breaking the silence after a few minutes. I wasn't lying when I said no. It wasn't the cold that had me frozen. It was something else. I could feel his warmth beside me, his body so close, and it was becoming harder to ignore the tension building between us. Every breath felt more charged. Every shift in the bed felt like an invitation to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I turned my back to him, hoping the darkness would help me ignore the fact that I could feel him breathing in time with me. But the quiet didn't help. It only made the moments feel heavier. Time seemed to slow. each second stretching longer as the clock ticked closer to midnight. And then, at midnight, something happened that I never saw coming. The night the storm hit, it felt like more than just the weather shifting. The rain started out soft, a quiet patter against the windows, but it quickly built into something much stronger. The kind of storm that feels like it's rattling the world outside, as if the skies themselves are unsettled. And maybe, just maybe, the same could be said for what was happening inside the apartment. I remember it clearly. The heater had stopped working, leaving the apartment colder than usual. The chill in the air seemed to seep through every crack in the walls, as if it had a mind of its own. I was bundled up in a blanket on the couch, trying to ignore the discomfort. It wasn't like I had any other option. The blanket on the couch was all I had left to keep warm. Joran, in the other room, seemed to be dealing with it just fine. He was always the calm one, the one who would shrug off inconveniences like they didn't exist. But I knew deep down there was more to his calm than just not caring. That night, though, everything felt different. I had no idea that in a matter of hours, everything would shift, and I'd be standing at the crossroads of a friendship, a line that was being crossed, with no way to turn back. Joran stood in my doorway, his figure framed by the rain. His hair was a mess, damp from the downpour, and there was something in the way he looked at me, a mixture of annoyance and hope, that stopped me from saying no. I should have said no, shouldn't I? I should have sent him back to his own room, let him find a way to survive the cold. But instead I hesitated, just for a moment. And that hesitation, that moment of indecision, is all it took for him to walk in and change everything. "I'm not going to cuddle you, Kale," he said, his voice light, like it was some sort of joke. But there was something in the air between us that wasn't a joke. It wasn't just the cold or the rain. It was the weight of what had been building between us for weeks. Something we'd both been skirting around, pretending wasn't there. I moved over in the bed, making room for him, telling myself it would be fine. Just one night, just a cold night. But as soon as he settled in beside me, I could feel the difference. The warmth of his body against mine, the proximity that had never been there before, was almost too much to ignore. The bed was small, too small for two people who didn't want to face what was between them. And yet, there we were, trying to pretend that nothing had changed, even though everything already had. We lay there in the dark, the sound of the rain against the window almost deafening in the silence between us. I wanted to ignore it, pretend that this was just two roommates sharing a bed because of circumstance, nothing more. But the truth was, the air between us was charged. I could feel it in the way his breathing matched mine, in the way his body seemed to shift just a little too close, like he was testing the boundaries. I could feel the tension, the pull, and I didn't know if I was supposed to fight it or embrace it. "Are you cold?" he asked after a minute, his voice quiet in the stillness. I didn't respond right away. I could have said yes, but the truth was, I wasn't cold at all. I was anything but cold. The warmth from him beside me was overwhelming, and my heart began to race in a way I couldn't ignore. I turned to face the wall, trying to focus on anything that wasn't him, on anything that wasn't the way his body was so close to mine. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop feeling it. The charge, the electric pull that was drawing me closer to him, against every ounce of reason I had. Then, the clock hit midnight. The moment that would change everything. I felt his hand move, slowly, cautiously, like he was testing the darkness. At first it brushed against my forearm, just a light touch, but then it slid lower. A deliberate movement, one that sent a shockwave of heat through my body. My heart skipped, my breath caught in my throat. I knew what was happening. He was awake, he was choosing this, and I didn't pull away. For the first time since he'd moved in, I didn't want to pretend that it didn't mean anything. I didn't want to deny what I was feeling anymore. "Joran," I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. But there was no answer. His hand didn't stop. It slid lower, just enough to make me realize he wasn't backing down. My body tensed, frozen in a moment of indecision, and then he pulled away, slowly. as though he had just realized what he had done, or perhaps what we had both done. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice was low, full of something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Fear? Or was it something else entirely? He rolled over and turned his back to me. The warmth of his hand had already disappeared, leaving me to lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, mind racing. What had just happened? Was it a mistake? Was it just a slip-up in the heat of the moment? Or was it something more? The silence in the room was suffocating. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could feel was the warmth of his touch, the way his fingers had brushed my skin. The apology he had whispered echoed in my mind, but so did everything else. The electricity, the desire, the confusion. And that's when it hit me. Nothing would be the same again. That night, everything changed. The next morning, I woke up before him. The soft glow of the early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. The silence of the room felt different. He was still lying next to me, his arm draped across the side of the bed, but there was a distance between us now that hadn't been there the night before. It wasn't physical. No, the space was something deeper, something unspoken, yet so very present. I could feel the weight of the night lingering in the air, even as I tried to pretend everything was fine. The hand, the touch, the way it had shifted everything between us. I couldn't deny that something had happened, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what it meant, and maybe that was the hardest part, the uncertainty. The fact that neither of us had spoken about it, yet it had already changed everything. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest, the feeling of something unfinished, something unresolved. But it was impossible. Every inch of the room felt charged, as if everything that had been hidden, everything that had gone unsaid, was suddenly right there between us, hanging like a cloud. As I lay there, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, I realized how much I had already tried to convince myself that nothing was different. That maybe it had been a mistake, a fleeting moment of confusion in the heat of the night. But then I thought back to the way his fingers had brushed my skin, the way his hand had lingered, as if testing the waters. He hadn't pulled away. Neither had I, and I could feel it now more than ever. This connection, this tension was real. It wasn't going away. It was something neither of us could ignore, no matter how hard we tried. Finally, I heard him stir, the soft rustle of the sheets, the shifting of his body as he slowly woke up. His eyes opened, and for a split second I thought maybe he wouldn't look at me. Maybe he'd pretend that nothing had happened, but instead, he turned to me, his gaze locking with mine. And that was when I knew. The question that had been hanging in the air, the one I was afraid to ask, the one I didn't want to voice, was now on both of our minds. "Are we really going to pretend nothing happened last night?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The tension in my chest tightened, the knot that had been there since midnight now fully exposed. I had to know. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. For a long moment, Joran didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the side, almost as if he was looking for something. An answer, maybe. But there was no answer to give. There were no simple words that could make the situation feel less complicated. He sighed, a deep exhale that seemed to carry everything he was feeling. "I wasn't thinking," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "It was late and I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly." But I wasn't sure I believed that. The way he'd touched me, so carefully, so deliberately, told me it wasn't just an accident. He had made a choice, and the fact that he was now trying to brush it off as a mistake only made the air between us feel heavier. I needed to hear the truth. The real reason behind what had happened, and maybe more importantly, how he felt about it. "It's not about the touch," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "It's about you." "About us. I've been trying to figure out what's going on between us, why things are so different now. Why it feels like everything's changed." Joran didn't say anything for a while. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and I could see the conflict there. The uncertainty. The fear. He was afraid of what he felt, of what I might feel, and the idea of losing the stability we had built together. He had spent months denying what was happening between us, trying to keep things simple. But now he couldn't deny it anymore. Neither of us could. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice quiet. "It's just living with you, seeing you every day, being this close to you. It's hard to ignore how I feel, and that scares me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to say either. I had been hiding my feelings too, pretending that nothing had changed when, in truth, everything had shifted. I had tried to convince myself that I wasn't attracted to him, that I wasn't feeling something I didn't want to acknowledge. But here it was, out in the open. The truth. And now, we had to decide what to do with it. The silence stretched between us, thick with emotions we couldn't name. But finally, I spoke again. "Then don't pretend," I said softly, looking him straight in the eye. "Stop fighting it." Joran's expression faltered. For a moment, it was like he didn't know what to do with my words. He took a step back, almost as if to protect himself, as though acknowledging what he was feeling would break everything. "I can't," he said, his voice shaky. "I just need time." Time. It was always time, wasn't it? Time to process. Time to figure things out. But how much time did we have before this tension snapped? How long could we keep pretending that we were just roommates, just friends, when we both knew there was something more? I watched him leave the room, retreating into his own space. And as the door closed behind him, I felt the weight of everything that had just been said. The uncertainty, the fear, the possibility of something more. And I wondered how long I could keep living with someone who made me feel everything, only to run away the moment it became real. The days that followed weren't much better. Joran avoided me, spending more time in his room or leaving early for work. We exchanged brief pleasantries, a nod here, a joke there, but nothing more. The silence between us grew, thin and fragile, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, but whenever our eyes met, he quickly looked away. It was as if we were both afraid of what we might see in each other's gaze. 3 days passed. 3 days of walking around each other like strangers in the same apartment. 3 days of wondering if we could ever go back to the way things were. And yet, neither of us could let go of what was lingering between us. 3 days had passed since that night, and things between us had only become more complicated. The tension that had once felt like an electric spark between us now felt like an entire storm, unpredictable, impossible to ignore, and far too powerful to control. We were avoiding each other, speaking only in passing, exchanging nods, or the occasional joke. But the unspoken words lingered in every room we entered together, in every silence between us. I could feel the distance growing, and it gnawed at me. How much longer could we keep pretending nothing had changed? How long could we keep avoiding the truth that was now undeniable? I knew Joran was just as trapped in this silent struggle as I was, and it felt suffocating. It wasn't just the awkward glances anymore. It was the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we were both too afraid to face. Then came the day when I couldn't avoid it any longer. I came home to find Joran sitting on the couch, headphones around his neck, laptop open in front of him. He looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained. His head was tilted back on the cushions, his eyes closed, like he was trying to escape from the same thoughts that had been consuming me for days. When I walked in, he didn't even acknowledge me at first, but I could feel it. The same tension that had been building for days, hanging in the air like a thick fog. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the silence. "You okay?" He opened one eye, giving me a tired smile. "I will be." It wasn't much, but the way he said it told me everything. He wasn't okay. Neither of us was. The distance between us was suffocating, and I couldn't pretend anymore that we could just live with it. So I sat on the far edge of the couch, not too close, but not far either. The space between us wasn't physical anymore. It was emotional, heavy, and unspoken. This thing between us, I said carefully, watching him. We can't just keep pretending it didn't happen. Joran sat up, folding his hands together. He didn't look at me right away, and I could see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. It was like he didn't want to face this, but at the same time, he couldn't avoid it any longer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, vulnerable. "I know," he said, a sigh escaping his lips. "But pretending feels safer than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes still avoiding mine. "The alternative is, I don't know, losing control, hurting you." Hurting me? I don't even know what I am, Kale. I've never felt this way before. And it scares the hell out of me. I could hear the fear in his voice. It was the same fear that had been holding us both back from saying anything. The fear of what might happen if we let go, if we acknowledged that something had changed between us. And I knew it was the fear of not being able to go back, not being able to undo the feelings, the connection we were both so afraid of. My heart ached for him. And yet, as much as I understood his fear, I couldn't ignore mine anymore. I couldn't keep living in this space where we were both pretending. Because the truth was, I was just as afraid as he was. But I wasn't going to wait forever. I took a deep breath, then spoke. "Then maybe we stop trying to define it for now. Maybe we stop running from it." Joran paused, his fingers gripping the edge of the couch. I saw him struggle with my words, weighing them in his mind. He seemed torn, unsure if he was ready to let go of the safety he had built for himself. But what he didn't realize was that by running from it, by holding on to his fear, he was already losing something. Us. The chance for something real. "I can't keep pretending this isn't real," I continued, my voice steady now. "Because it is. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, but we can't keep walking around this, Joran. We've crossed a line. We can't go back, no matter how much we try to pretend." He stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. I could see his shoulders tense, and I knew what he was feeling. The push and pull of wanting something but being terrified of it at the same time. "The night I touched you." His voice faltered, but he carried on, speaking in a whisper. "I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what I was doing. And when I felt your skin, when I realized you didn't pull away, it scared the hell out of me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't something that could be shrugged off or ignored. It was real. And as much as Joran had been fighting it, so had I. The difference was, I wasn't willing to run anymore." "Then do something about it," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and hope. "Because if you keep walking away every time you feel something, eventually, I'm going to stop waiting for you to come back." Joran turned around, his face softening as his eyes met mine. He stepped closer, just a few feet, but it felt like he was standing on the edge of something monumental. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as if he was searching for something, maybe an answer, maybe permission, maybe the courage to face the truth. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I want to stop running from this. I want to stop pretending that it's nothing." The room seemed to hold its breath. The weight of his words, of his admission, was both terrifying and freeing. For the first time I saw him, not as the guy who was afraid to feel something more, but as someone who was finally facing what he had been hiding from. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I touched his arm. "Then don't run anymore. Stay." And in that moment, something shifted between us. The uncertainty, the hesitation, melted away. Joran didn't pull back this time. He didn't run. He stayed. And for the first time in days, I could feel the tension between us begin to release. Like the storm that had been raging inside us both was finally starting to calm. We were no longer pretending. We were no longer afraid. We were simply real. There's a moment in every journey when you reach the point of no return. That delicate line between fear and hope, hesitation and commitment. It's that quiet moment when the weight of everything you've been holding back finally becomes too much to ignore. It's the moment you have to choose whether to keep running or to stop and face what's right in front of you. For Joran and me, that moment had arrived. After days of walking around the tension we had both created, trying to keep things normal, we'd finally stopped pretending. The truth was out. There was no more running. There was no more hiding. We had crossed the line between what we had told ourselves was just friendship and the reality of what we were both feeling. It was raw, it was real, and it was terrifying, but it was also undeniable. As Joran stood there, in front of me, finally not running from what had been building between us, I could feel the weight of the decision we were about to make. For so long, we'd both been scared. Scared of what it would mean to cross that line, scared of losing what we already had. But that night, in the quiet of the apartment, something changed. We both knew, deep down, that we couldn't keep living in that space of uncertainty anymore. We couldn't pretend that we weren't on the verge of something bigger than just a friendship. It was time to face the truth. It was time to decide if we were going to take that step forward, together, into something new. Joran had been holding back for so long, afraid of what would happen if he let go of his fear. But now, standing there in front of me, with the weight of everything he had said, I could see the shift. He wasn't just standing in front of me anymore. He was making a choice, and that was all I needed to see. He was ready to stop running. He was ready to be honest, and I was ready too. Ready to face whatever came next, with him by my side. "I want this," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, but filled with a certainty I hadn't heard from him before. "I want you. I want us. No more running." His words hit me like a wave, washing away the last of the doubt, the last of the fear that had kept us from embracing what was so obviously between us. There was no more hesitation in his voice, no more pretending. He had made the choice to step into this with me, to take the risk, to put everything on the line. And in that moment, I knew we were on the brink of something that could change everything. I didn't need to say much. All I needed to do was reach for him. My hand found his, and in that touch there was a promise. A promise of new beginnings, of starting fresh, of living in the truth of what we were feeling. For the first time, there were no barriers between us, no walls built up by fear, no uncertainty about what we meant to each other. It wasn't just about a kiss or a touch anymore. It was about the promise we were making to each other, to not let go, no matter what. "I don't want to regret this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't want to wonder what it would have been like if we hadn't tried." Joran's thumb gently brushed the back of my hand, and I felt the weight of his promise in that simple touch. "We're not going to regret it," he said, looking me in the eyes with the same depth that I had seen in him all along. "We're going to make this work, together." That was the moment. That was the moment when everything shifted. It wasn't just about a relationship or a feeling anymore. It was about two people choosing each other, choosing to move forward, together, without the baggage of past fears or the uncertainty of what might come next. We didn't know what the future would hold. We didn't know if it would be easy or difficult, or if we'd face challenges we couldn't foresee. But what we did know was that we were both all in. We had decided to let go of the doubts and take the leap together. And that was the most powerful thing either of us could do. For so long, Joran had kept his distance, afraid of what admitting the truth might mean. And for just as long, I had held on to my own doubts, unsure of whether I could trust him, unsure of whether we could handle the weight of what we felt for each other. But now, standing here in this moment of clarity, all of that seemed insignificant. The fear didn't matter. The past didn't matter. All that mattered was what was happening now. This connection, this bond that we had finally allowed ourselves to explore, without hesitation. "I'm scared," Joran said softly, but this time his voice wasn't filled with doubt. It was just a recognition of what we were both feeling. "But I'm ready to see where this goes. I want to see where we can go together." And in that moment, I realized something. That sometimes, the most important part of love is not the moment you first fall for someone, but the moment you decide to step forward into it, even when everything inside you tells you to be afraid. The moment when you look at someone and say, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." That's when everything changes. That's when the real journey begins. So we stood there, looking at each other, knowing that this wasn't just the end of something, but the beginning of something new. A new chapter, a new promise, and a new life. One we were going to build together. And as the days went by and the reality of our decision began to settle in, I couldn't help but smile, because I knew that despite all the fear, despite all the uncertainty, we had made the right choice. We had chosen each other, and there was nothing more powerful than that. Sometimes the hardest part isn't taking the first step. It's choosing to keep walking, even when the road ahead is uncertain. When Joran and I finally admitted what had been simmering between us, we didn't just face the vulnerability of love, we faced the challenge of what came after. And that's what matters most. It's easy to let fear hold us back. To stay in a place where things are comfortable, even if it means pretending to be something we're not. But the truth is, real growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. It happens when we take a chance, when we face the unknown together, and when we choose to be honest with ourselves and each other. That night we made our promise to each other wasn't just a turning point in our relationship. It was a promise to stop pretending, to stop letting fear control us. And while we didn't know what the future would hold, we knew that as long as we faced it together, we'd be okay. Because love isn't just about the moments we feel close to each other. It's about the times when we decide to lean in, to be vulnerable, and to trust that the other person will do the same. So, what comes next? Well, that's the beautiful part. The truth is, the journey doesn't have a final destination. It's the little moments, the everyday decisions to keep showing up, keep growing, and keep choosing each other that build the kind of connection that lasts. And for you, listening right now, what if the key to your own happiness is letting go of the fear that holds you back? What if you started embracing the uncertainty, took a chance on something real, and chose to live authentically, no matter what it might cost? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know what the future looks like. But what you do need is the courage to step into it, to trust in yourself, and to know that sometimes the best stories, the most meaningful connections, come from taking risks. So here's to embracing what comes next, no matter where the road leads. Because the best part of any journey is knowing you have someone by your side. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Join us on this journey, because love, honesty, and authenticity don't have a finish line. They're ongoing and they're worth every step. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever taken a leap of faith in love or in life? What's your next step? Remember, sometimes the best chapters in your life start when you stop holding back and let yourself be seen for who you truly are.